the update in this MV Barima tragedy. And I ain't got to recap that. I'm not going to insult your intelligence to recap because everybody been following it and everybody have a fair understanding. And this everybody who I'm talking about is not the same everybody that knew of the president's mega farm. You know, the president had said that everybody knew of the farm. And I said, you jump out and recognize. I said the president, when he said everybody, he didn't mean all of us. He meant there's somebody whose name is everybody, right? The Christian name or the first name is every, and the surname or last name is body. So everybody knew of it. That's not the same person I'm talking about. Because I'm sure all of you would have been apprised through social media, through regular media, through friends of what the Barima tragedy is all about. But what shocked the world yesterday is when we learned, at least I was shocked. I say again, over and over, things in this country that is not a real place that happen shouldn't really shock you. But yet still, despite that, when certain things happen, you are shocked. Yesterday, I was shocked when I read that 3 men were charged with murder in relation to the sinking of the MV Barima. The captain, the first mate, and the person who was in charge of loading the vessel, they were charged with the capital offense of murder. They are paid before the magistrate and they are remanded. So that is what I'm going to spend the remainder of the time analyzing. And let me start off by telling you or reminding you, I am no liar. I always like to make the point. I am a liar. I'm a retired senior police officer. I retired at the rank of assistant commissioner. At the time when I retired on the 1st of August 2010, I was the second most senior man in the force to Henry Green as an assistant commissioner. Jagio didn't promote me to deputy, but I was carrying out the functions of deputy commissioner operations. So unlike them who they come and sit down in the same chair and call themselves acting, and I was never acting. I was an assistant commissioner. I carried out the function of deputy commissioner operations at the time of retirement. Now, so I'm not a lawyer. However, I have been fortunate to have gone through some good training. I was a student at the Police Staff College in the United Kingdom in Bramshill in 1994. And you know, when I write, I'm promising to write. I have my report from the college. I have a report, and I have said to people that if they had asked me to write the report, I would not have written such a glowing report of myself. The modesty might have dictated I ease up, but I have that report someplace, a copy of it someplace. So I had the fortune of going there. And incidentally, in 1994, I'm the last person in the Ghana Police Force to have attended that prestigious college. During 1994, 3 persons went. I can't remember the order of the first 2. I was the last person in the last half of 94. Before me, that very year, you had retired Deputy Commissioner Henry Chester, and you had retired Commissioner Floyd McDonald. They went to the Staff College the same 1994, right there. And then I also, in 1998, I think it was, I had the good fortune again of attending the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation Academy, Quantico, Virginia, 193rd session, I think it was. So therefore, I got some background, which allows me to speak. 37 years in the Guyana Police Force, a lot of years in command positions, divisional command. I commanded the largest division, A Division, Morbies, B Division. I commanded D Division, West Demerara. I was the traffic chief on 2 occasions. I was the head of the Presidential Guard, as I said before, Deputy Commissioner Operations. I OC Tactical Services Unit, right? So I have some policing experience, and that is what I'm going to use. So don't let it run out and say, we're slow talking and he's not a liar. I'm not a liar, but I can tell you this. Having listened to the presentations of many of those who are called to the bar to practice law, I'm sure I'm going to do a better job than them. Be sure. Because when you listen to the presentations of some of those people, you cringe. First of all, some of them don't have deliverance. They can't speak. And for some of them who can speak a little, they seem not to know the law. Right? So that is what I'm going to seek to address. So I hope I lay that down clearly in front so we can understand. So let me play the tape to give you an understanding of what transpired yesterday. And I want you to listen to it carefully, right? Because there are lots of things to learn. Listen to what the captain has to say. Listen to what one of the defense counsels had to say in respect of what transpired there yesterday. So here we go. Oh my God, look at they lost them. Their expired since 2022.
And we know so far that the disclosure is that 72 bodies were recovered. And so they were charged for all 72 of those persons. We listened to the prosecution narrated the facts in relation to why they were charged, in terms of who have responsibility, and that the boat was overloaded. Now, you had the minister who is responsible for transport and harbor, came out and said on public television that the boat was not overloaded. And that was so pronounced. In every single press conference held by the Prime Minister, there was absolutely no indication that they found, in addition to the loading manifest, that they were able to establish the load of that boat. Now, you could imagine, there is a clear pronouncement yesterday that, and the fears of the Guyanese people, that we may not even see the boat back on water. So my thing is, how do they hope to establish the weight of that boat? How do they hope to establish that? This entire commission of inquiry that was announced by the president is a farce. Because the police have done what the commission of inquiry is supposed to do, and they have already come to a definitive conclusion on this matter. And so we have asked for an early disclosure. This matter was heard before the chief magistrate. It was transferred to the charity court, where it will be before the substantive magistrate, because that's the jurisdictional court. And that we have asked for early disclosure in the matter, which I believe is on the 3rd of August. Because we intend, as I said today in court, we intend to make preliminary legal arguments in relation to this matter.
Right, so you got the gist of what transpired there yesterday. Well, you know what struck me as strange? Well, several things have struck me as strange. But let me read what was said. As indicated there by Attorney at Law Dr. Dexter Todd, these 3 men are charged with murder, the capital offense of murder. That is the captain of the MV Barima, Kevin Price, I think, yeah, Kevin Price. The chief mate, Rondell Dwayne Roberts, and the goods superintendent of Transport and Harbors Department, Delon Grandison. So they are charged. And they are charged with 72 counts of murder. It is disclosed during the hearing yesterday before the chief magistrate. As I had explained to you on this program on several occasions, CC and I explained it to you, that the chief magistrate has jurisdiction all over the country, the entire country. So even though this offense is alleged to have occurred in another magisterial district, these accused persons were taken before the chief magistrate. Well, when they went there yesterday, the charge would have been read to them, or the charges, because the victims had to be named. And I suspect that the victims would have been named. Every one of those 72 persons would have been named. And after that, the magistrate would have told them that the charge is indictable and they are not required to plea. Right? So it's not a case where you ask them plea. And then, of course, because it's a murder charge, the question of bail would not have been considered. So they are remanded. But then the matter is now transferred to the district in which the offenses are alleged to have occurred, which is the Charity district. So they gone to the Charity Court, and as you would have heard, the lawyer there said, they have asked for early disclosure, and the disclosure is set for the 3rd of August. Now, what is disclosure? Disclosure simply means that all the evidence that the prosecution has in this case, all the statements or whatever evidence, they have to provide the defense with copies of those statements, right? Now, let me say this right off. The fact that the chief magistrate set an early date is commendable. First of all, it's commendable. August the 3rd, commendable. But let me say this. I will be shocked if when August the 3rd comes, they are ready to provide statements. Let me tell you up front, because when August the 3rd comes, you're going to hear some type of sand dancing, as we would say, as to why they are unable to provide statements. Mind you, and I'm going to go into this in great detail later. A file was created, and a file went to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Right? The police get a file. I suspect that file would have contained statements from the survivors and other people, statements. So it's on that basis that the Director of Public Prosecutions, having reviewed that file and all the statements in that file, would have said, well, she sees evidence that these people should be charged with murder, right? With murder. Because, let me say this too, there is no way on this God's earth that the police would have recommended a murder charge in that file. And I want to come and debunk me. Police would not have recommended murder charge, right? Police might not have even recommended any charge at all. But when it got to the DPP perused the file, and DPP said, this is murder. So, charged with murder, right? That is what, let me go to that part. Now, the next part that I found strange is listen to Dr. Todd last night. Dr. Todd said that having read the DPP gave the police legal advisor, Mandel Moore, the fiat or the authority to prosecute this case. I don't know if he can go to Charity, but at least he was there yesterday. And it simply means, well, I was shocked because I thought that the fact that Mandel Moore is the police legal advisor, that he would have gotten like a carte blanche fiat from the Director of Public Prosecution to prosecute police matters in the court. But apparently that is not so, because Dr. Todd mentioned that he got the fiat to prosecute these charges, right? But when the charges were read, you know, guys, is at a rare pace. I couldn't believe. Dr. Todd said, and I have absolutely no reason to not to believe what Dr. Todd said. The names of the victims were mentioned, right? And remember, they told us that of the persons, of the bodies that have been recovered, there are 5 that are still to be identified. In other words, you got 5 there without any name, right? And listen to this carefully, students. I am not making this up thing. You can't make this thing up. When Mandel Moore, the prosecutor, read and called out all the names, then he go on to say the 72 and others unknown. So these men are charged with 72 counts of murder and the murder of others who are unknown. Yeah, you think God is a real place? You forgive me for laughing. I ain't laughing because this is not a serious matter. Because I find this thing so, as we would say in Ghana, so jokey. You are charging people, and I'm going to come to that perhaps on the next day because it's an issue that I've been itching to talk about with the same unknown story and dead body and all that. I'm going to deal with it perhaps not today, maybe at some earlier time, maybe Friday. So they charge the names of all those persons who are the bodies that were recovered and identified had to be read out. Because remember that it's 72 counts. You got to read each count, right? And then they say others unknown. I made a note. They're charged with others unknown. So in other words, the 5 bodies that have not been recovered, they are charged with that too. And I suspect when they say others unknown, them people that are at the bottom of the ocean and have not been recovered, and they have indicated they have no intention of recovering it. They're charged for that too. They're charged with that too. Oh my God! Oh my God! Where are we? Where are we, my beautiful Guyana? And let me ask this question here now, before it slips me. Is there a process in Guyana to debar these people who exhibit such gross incompetence? Is there such a system? Somebody must tell me, so I should find out if there's a system to disbar people who call themselves attorneys at law and go to the court with such mendacious and incompetence, display such incompetence. Is there a thing to take away what they get? You see, that's why I like the police force in the army. Because they would have bossed you right there and then. You get bossed right there and then, right? But let me move on. I have a lot to say, right? Now, as was said before by many people, Dr. Todd Rather said it a while ago. They charged the captain and they charged the first mate. Those men were on the boat at the time of this disaster, this unfortunate disaster. Therefore, those men are victims and they are survivors. So you charge victims and survivors with murder, right? So in other words, you're saying that these persons intended, the captain and the first mate intended, they had the intention to kill these people. Maybe they were suicidal, right? Maybe, because they didn't take into consideration it's only by the grace of God that these men might have survived, because according to them, 15 of their colleagues perished. 15 of their colleagues perished on that vessel. But these 2 are charged. And then they charged the man who was on shore, what they call his name, the goods superintendent. Now, if you charge a good superintendent who was not on the vessel, I suspect, based on the title, he was responsible for the loading of the vessel. So you're charging the man who loading the vessel, and therefore you are implying, I want to see what statement again, but you're implying that he loaded, it was because of overload that this boat capsized. That is what why would you charge the man who is responsible for loading the vessel if you're not alleging that? They are alleging that the man who was responsible for loading the boat, or who was responsible for the load on the boat, his name is Grandison, right? Delon Grandison. You're saying that the boat was overloaded. But remember, Ejil said that the boat was not overloaded. Ejil, the quarter Jill, quarter Ejil. He's not no one, he's not no one Ejil. Not perhaps not even a quarter. A fraction Ejil said, listen to what he said.
The boat was not overloaded by passengers or by cargo. There was no engine problem or any mechanical problem. Even the survivors who made videos from the hospital, they're telling you what happened. And it had nothing to do with overload. and both taken in water. It had to do with the tide. Please be advised that the MV Barima is licensed to carry 284 tons of cargo. The cargo manifest shows that we had 268 tons, way below the cargo load. Secondly, the MV Barima is licensed to carry 397 passengers, and we only had 116 passengers on board. The misinformation of overloading as the cause of this incident must be dealt with for what it is. Misinformation and something to create panic and public mischief, and we debunk that in the very strongest terms.
How this man in charge as yet? How this bishop, how he in charge as yet? The man saying definitively that the boat was not overloaded. I know we know that. Because by the same token, remember he came back later, we talk about the manifest and the cargo capacity. He came back later and said that he was misled in respect to the number of persons on board this boat. They admitted that of the persons who survived, several of them, in the first instance, they claimed 32 of those persons were not listed on the manifest. Then of the bodies that were recovered, they claim another number of persons were not on the manifest. So if you ain't get all this information, I continue to ask the question, Ejil and others, Mark Phillips and all them, how do you know how many persons were on the boat, one? And if you ain't get no thing, how do you know what was the load of the that was carrying? You come and tell us, oh, it is registered to carry 284 tons. A boat registered since Noah was a boy, 87 years ago, registered to carry 287 tons. And you said it was below. How do you know the weight of that it was carrying? How do you know? Because we were told that the scale on the wharf is not working. And then Stephen Thomas, the man in charge of Marad, said there is what they call a load line on the vessel, a line on the vessel. So you can look at the line and determine whether the boat is overloaded or not. That is what Steve Thomas told us. I get them record, you know. I know they'll come and they'll tell you all sort of thing. So how do you know what it is? And if you're going to charge Mr. Grandison, the load superintendent, suggesting that the boat was overloaded and he would have caused it to be overloaded, Ejil said that the boat wasn't overloaded. Steve Thomas said you get this load line to check. And let me tell you all, off the top, this is just scapegoating, right? This is just the government scapegoating, not despite what the DPP said about the independence of the DPP and all sort of bullcrap. That is not so. That is not so. The Constitution speaks about the independence, but the DPP don't act independently. I mean, let me remind you all again, the DPP, this is in the New Building Society fiasco some years ago, right? And attorney senior counsel Bernard DeSantis made a statement which I just all refer to. All the students will remember. He says, this is Bernard DeSantis, and this is contained in the book Hijacking of the New Building Society, which I've always encouraged you people to buy and read. Very, very revealing of how wicked, stink, and dirty this government is. The PPP people are long before now. It's in the DNA. They have always been like that. And here what Bernard DeSantis had to say. This is something that he, in a response to the acting chancellor at the time, who was Carl Singh. Here he says, quote, one of the matters which has been suspected by members of the criminal bar for some time is that the acting director of public prosecutions, whose husband is a Muslim cleric, cannot divorce our religion from our professional duties. In the instant case, Mistress Aliak, prior to charges being instituted against my client, held a meeting at the headquarters of the CIOG, that is the Central Islamic Organization of Guyana, which was attended inter alia by her husband and a Muslim member of staff of the NBS, at which meeting the affairs of the NBS, that's the New Building Society, were discussed as they pertain to the loss of money, which later formed the basis of the charges. It is an open secret that Mrs. Aliak's husband played a significant role in the matter. Come and tell what independence from the independence and all them type of thing. Independence. So the charge. So again, I'm saying that based on all the facts that we have known so far, that the fact that this man Granderson is charged, the Lord Superintendent is charged, then the DPP is saying that she saw a statement to suggest that the boat was overloaded, and the overloading would have been partly responsible for the sinking of this vessel, which took an unknown number of lives. That is what they are implying. But let me say this, putting on my police cap. All the passengers did say that, well, I just don't say all. Let me modify that. Most of the passengers, the majority of the passengers who gave interviews have said that the boat was overloaded. That is what they said. Ejil said no, the boat wasn't overloaded. When it comes to the weight, Steve Thomas said, well, even if the scaling working, there is this load line that you can look to know. I guess load line is some line as the boat is loaded, the boat goes down, and there must be some line to indicate what type of weight it's on, right? So the survivors said that most of them, all that I saw, said that the boat was overloaded. They said so. From very early, the boat overloaded, the boat was taking in water. Ejil said, no, that wasn't so. Now, let me put on the police cap. Let's assume, for argument's sake, because you're going to a court of law, the boat was in fact overloaded. How are you proving that? Madam DPP, tell me how you're proving that. From statements by the survivors? What technical experience or so they have to be deemed as experts or so to say, yes, the boat was overloaded? Because remember, you don't have any load, these things weren't weighed. And then it makes it even more ridiculous. It makes it even more ridiculous when we are hearing from Prime Minister Lion Mark Phillips that maybe the boat will not be recovered. You know, Mark says, sir, that where it is, because the French, and he said, I listened to him yesterday, he had a press conference. He says, well, he says something, the Frenchman or something like that, not French, the Frenchman or something, said that the boat is in a precarious position and it might be difficult for them to, it's dangerous for them to get into the boat. Almost zero visibility, lots of lines with amok and all sort of thing, very dangerous. And there's a suggestion now that the boat might remain right there. So those bodies that are trapped, suspected to be trapped in the vessel, will not be recovered. And again, how you charge him in for that, right? So if you don't get this boat up, what evidence you're going to then use to say that this boat was overloaded? One would have expected that you're going to recover the boat with the cargo, especially the cargo in the cargo hold, because them have been at the top of the boat might fall off, right? You're going to get some scientific measurement to determine what was the load of the boat at the time. But you're bringing up the boat. That's what you say you're not going to bring up the boat. But you're still you're charging this man with this boat being overloaded. This makes sense. And it's straight scapegoating, as was being said. They just do that. So that is going to make news all over the world. And some people who are not familiar with all the details, they say, oh, the government doing something. The government doing something. And I have seen many, many people making all sorts of comments, right? Including Nandla. I'm going to deal with it if I have enough time. About the charge of murder. Let me tell you, I have to go to my notes, I have to go to my notes to deal with murder, because that is one of the offenses as a recruit, right? That you are taught, the elements of murder. Let me pull up my note. I'll get it here. Yes, here what it says. This is murder we're talking about. It says, murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. It requires a specific mental state and lacks legal justification, like self-defense. So if you're going to get charged, if you're going to charge a murder, and you ought to, and we can go and you got some more nuanced explanation and so on. I'm going to all of that. We say murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. It requires specific mental state and lacks legal justification like self-defense. In other words, they're telling you that self-defense can be a legal justification if you kill somebody. A man attack you and you respond, defend yourself, he ends up dead, you might have a legal justification of self-defense, right? So you're going to get convicted for murder. The core elements, there are two core elements of murder. The actus reus, and we got to Latin here now. And the actus reus means the act. If you pull the trigger, if you stop the man, the act. You have to prove the act. And the actus reus means an unlawful act or omission. Because when you talk about crimes, it's not only the commission of, when you do something, if you fail to do that which was your legal duty to do, then you can also be guilty of an offense. So remember that. And I'm talking here specifically to the young policemen who listen to this program, because I know many of them listen. These things are not taught to them at training school as they were when I was a trainee. So you have the act and you have omission. You can be guilty by committing something, you're doing something positive, you do something. Or if you omit to do that which was your legal duty to do, you can also be guilty of a crime. So we say the unlawful act or omission by one person that causes the death of another human being. So that is the actus reus, the guilty act. And then you have the other aspect is the mens rea, the mental state, right? Remember we talk about the malice aforethought, you talk about the mental state. Malice aforethought, which includes the intent to kill. Intent, and here this is the nuance part, intent to kill or intent to cause serious bodily harm, extreme recklessness, or committing a dangerous felony. So let me give you an example there right away. What we call felony murder. Somebody, one or more person goes into a home to rob the people. That's a felony. Robbery is a felony. They had no intent to kill when they go in there. You got to rob these people. But during the commission of this robbery, persons are killed. Felony murder. So you charge them for murder. They committed the act of murder during the course of committing a felony. So it's a felony murder. Right? So let me go further to explain to you. Right? So we say the mental state is important. For example, let me go further and explain. Let me try to explain this thing to you. And the difference between murder and maybe you're going to get a manslaughter, which I'll explain a little later. Now imagine two men arguing on the road. Big passerade there on the road. And one of the men push his hand in the trousers, in the waist, pull out a gun and shoot the next one. Right? Shoot the next one. Or he pull out a knife and stab him and he dies. Things happen right there simultaneously in near proximity of each other. You might get to murder, you might charge you for manslaughter. Now, a similar scenario, the two men are arguing and get heated. The man run over, he live nearby, he run home for his cutlass or he gun and he come back and kill the man. The mens rea is established. The mens rea, you know, it's a justification of self-defense. He was there and he left the scene, he went into a car, he went somewhere, get a gun. As different to if he had it on him and he just spontaneously responded. He run, go in the car, you will get a murder charge because you can establish there that he had the intention. In other words, they say you have sufficient time to cool off, and he ain't cool off, he come and he kill the man, it's a murder charge, you're gonna get. Right? The intent is there. And as I said too, you have a case where the person intent, they not set out to kill, but they're saying that if it's extreme reckless, you intend to cause serious bodily harm. You intend to cause serious bodily harm and the person dies, well then yes, you're going to catch a murder charge. And we were taught, and I did the research on this, we were taught that the person, the victim, had to die within a year and a day of the infliction of the injury. So the man is shot or he's stabbed or if he lashed and everything, he has to die within a year and a day. That used to be it. Let me explain that. You have to die within a year or a day in order for you to in order for you to get a conviction for murder. But then let me read what the research now is telling you. And I know if Guyana has advanced. Guyana seems so backward when it comes to these things. It says here, this is historically true. The year and a day rule, right? Historically true. Under the old common law. But it has been widely abolished. The requirement known as the year and a day rule, which states that a person could not be charged with murder if the victim died more than 1 year and 1 day after the original injury, right? Let me explain that further. The old common law created a limit because ancient doctors could not clearly prove if an old injury or a new health problem caused the death. So the year and a day, back in the day, they didn't get all the science and all the technology. So the older doctors couldn't really prove if the person died from this old injury that was inflicted or some new injury. So they had this year and a day rule that you ought to die, the person ought to have died within a year and a day, right? The law assumes any death after this time frame was too far removed from the defendant's original action. Anything outside a year and a day, at the time, they say, well, it is too far removed from the original action, so you really can't get a conviction for murder. But modern changes, let me tell you about modern changes, right? Modern medicine and advanced forensic tools now let doctors prove the exact cause of death long after the attack because of modern medicine, long after the attack, right? Many places and countries, such as England, via the Law Reform Act of 1996, has officially ended this rule. So in England now, you know, a year and a day rule. As I've said, I don't know if this backward place that we call Guyana has moved to that, right? We don't know. I don't know if they have moved or if they're still holding out that the person ought to have died within a year and a day of the infliction of the injury. I don't know. But I'm saying in England, since 1996, they have abolished that. And that is because they say of modern medicine. And the doctors can now prove the cause of death long after this 1 year and a day. Now I said prosecutors can now charge a suspect with murder if the injury caused the death, even if the victim lived on life support for several years. So even if the victim lived on life support for several years, you could still charge and convict for murder. So young policemen, again I say, I don't know if the same applies to Guyana. Because in my day, we were taught that the victim ought to have succumbed within a year and a day of the injury. A year and a day, right? And you know, there are other things that I don't really tell you all now, teach you all now, because in those days, I ain't got time to go into it now, but in those days, you get the initiation of the crime. Let me say the man is wounded in the United States, or not go so far, he's wounded in Trinidad, or he's wounded in Guyana, and he goes to Trinidad for treatment, and he dies in Trinidad. All of those things used to be discussed. Where was the offense committed? How are you going to prove it and all them everything? All of those things used to be discussed. And that is one of the reasons I have said to you repeatedly on this program that when a person makes a report of an assault and the person asks to get medical attention, it is for the police to escort the person to the hospital to get the medical attention. Not for the person to be given a medical certificate and say, go and bring it back. No, it is to the police to escort that person to get medical attention. Because the police who did the escort will then write a statement to say, right, that no other injuries were inflicted on this person from the time he made the report, the time he was treated by the doctor who wrote the medical certificate. Very important, but the practice has come now where they just tell people, say, well, look, get a medical, go to the hospital. So some wicked body, so they're on the way to the hospital now, they're running to some other body who they had a problem with, the body put a lash in them. Additional injuries. How do you determine whether that was the injury that was reported originally or not? If police then escort this person. See, you see how this thing just come back? Now, let me deal with the other aspect now. We talk about murder. Let me talk now about manslaughter. You know, in the States, they're going to tell you about murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree and all of that. In Guyana, we talk about murder or manslaughter. So let me deal with manslaughter. It says manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice or premeditation. It is generally split into two main types: voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. Then you also have vehicular manslaughter, right? Well, Guyana, we ain't got vehicular manslaughter. Even though nonetheless they adjusted the law, they charged one man some time ago, the man who shot and killed the policewoman in front of BV police station, and we were advised that when the matter got to court, they withdrew the manslaughter charge and they put in the regular causing death by dangerous driving. And we're not hearing anything about that any longer. So you have vehicular manslaughter. So you have, as they say, you have voluntary, which is the intention to kill. Let me go back. Manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice or premeditation. And they say you have voluntary manslaughter and you have involuntary manslaughter. The core elements: no malice, lacks the evil intent or pre-planning required for a murder charge. General intent involves lower culpability, such as intense emotional impulse or extreme carelessness. Listen to this carefully. When you talk, they said general intent involves lower culpability, such as intense emotional impulse or extreme carelessness. Manslaughter, extreme carelessness. Then they go on, the two types: voluntary, intentionally killing committed in the heat of passion. Yeah, what the explanation says here: intentional killing committed in the heat of passion. As I said, the two men fighting and the man just float, heat of passion. Shoot, dead. Stab, dead. You fight, you lick it down, you broke your neck, dead. Manslaughter. After a sudden, strong provocation that would cause a reasonable person to lose control. A strong provocation to cause a reasonable person to lose control. You stand up there, you think, man run up to you, dig two bucks in you. Bop, bop, strong provocation. And there and then, you had a knife for you. You're going to get a knife. Or, don't let me bring a knife. You responded by giving you one blow. Boom up. You fall out, you knock your head and you're dead. Strong provocation. The heat of passion. After sudden strong provocation that would cause a reasonable person to lose control. A reasonable person to lose control. Then you have involuntary. Unintentional killing caused by recklessness, criminal negligence, or during the commission of a lesser unlawful act. Now, if we are to look at this definition again, where they talk about involuntary, unintentional killing caused by recklessness, criminal negligence. Now, how Agile and Indara get charged if we are to apply that definition? Ask the DPP, if we are to apply that definition, how come? Remember, we're saying involuntary manslaughter relates to the unintentional killing caused by recklessness, criminal negligence. And from all the evidence we have seen so far, the minister and those below him were criminally negligent. So how come they don't catch a manslaughter charge? Tell me that. And these are questions that should be directed to the DPP. Well, we know they're going to tell you, well, we got to wait on the Commission of Inquiry. They couldn't wait on the Commission of Inquiry to determine the guilt or innocence of these three men, but they're going to tell you anything else. If you ask them about Ejil, if you ask them about Indar, if you ask them about anybody else, they're going to tell you that you have to wait the Commission of Inquiry, which I'll address as we go along. Right? Then, of course, I'll tell you have vehicular manslaughter, which resulting from driving a vehicle in a grossly negligent or unlawful manner, such as driving under the influence of alcohol. So, again, when we look at the definition of murder, how are these men charged with murder? Is the DPP saying that she has evidence to show that these men set out, and as they say, they had this premeditation, malice aforethought to kill these 72 people. That is what the DPP is suggesting. Or, as the thing say, the other part talk about the recklessness, extreme recklessness. Extreme recklessness is terrible. Who's going to prove that? If you want to say it was extreme recklessness, what about the part with people who should be also be accountable? Who are the ones who should also be held accountable? And you know, there is a tape that I saw this morning talking about accountability. And I'll tell you all, I got a lot to talk about this morning. Lot to talk about. Because even though, right, before I go to the accountability part, some of the usual, well, I shouldn't say the usual suspects, some people, I'll tell you all, I'm not a liar, but you have people with legal training who are saying this murder charge against these people is unfair, unjust, and let me pull up one of the things. Hold on, I got something I want to read. Let me read this, right? Let me read this part for you to understand. This was published yesterday, Kaicho News. Attorney at law Nigel Hughes has sharply criticized the decision to charge a captain and two crew members. I said two crew members, one crew member on a land of the ill-fated MV Barima with murder, describing the move as, quote, a most perversive attempt at distraction, which I endorse, end of quote. In the wake of the maritime disaster, in a strongly worded statement posted on his Facebook page, Hughes argued that the charges raise serious legal questions and could have the unintended or intended effect of preventing the accused from giving evidence before the Commission of Inquiry into the tragedy. Quote, a charge of murder requires the accused that the accused had the intention to kill the victim, end of quote. You said, quote, in the circumstances of this charge, it would mean that when they set sail, the accused intended to kill or cause grievous bodily harm to every person on board, or that they developed that intention at some stage after the voyage began, end of quote. Hughes questioned whether the murder charges were instead designed to ensure that the captain and crew remain silent during the inquiry. That is what can happen. This I'll talk about a little later. Quote, could it be that the real intention here is that, having been charged with murder, the accused will be unable to testify before the Commission of Inquiry, since any testimony they give can be used against them at a criminal trial, end of quote, he asked. According to Hughes, the prosecution risks undermining the search for answers by effectively removing key witnesses from the inquiry process. And he's quoted again saying, perhaps we have the unique ability to compound what is already a tragedy of epic proportions into an additional manifest injustice by instituting murder charges against them, again, silencing key witnesses before the Commission of Inquiry, end of quote, Mr. You said. This comment came after prosecutors jointly charged the captain, the captain and two crew members, again, the same two crew members, not two crew members, is a crew member, the chief mate, and the loading superintendent of the MV Barima with murder following the vessel's catastrophic sinking, which claimed the lives of more than 100 and has triggered widespread call for accountability across the maritime sector. The trio was all before the Georgetown Magistrate Court Tuesday morning, where they were remanded to prison pending the start of the legal proceedings. And then they tell us who are the people who are charged here and all of that. And then they say, meanwhile, in a press release, police said, hear what the police say now. Meanwhile, in the press release, the police said, following legal advice obtained from the Director of Public Prosecution, the three employees attached to the Transport and Harbours Department were charged with the offense of murder, contrary to common law, in relation to the tragic death of passengers who were on board the MV Barima. Then they tell you the MV Barima capsized. Again, this is an attorney saying, not me. The attorney. And another attorney, he's an attorney. I don't know if he's still practicing law, but there's another attorney who made a statement. Listen to it. It's a short statement. Listen to this one, and don't be surprised as to who it is. Listen to him.
Do you believe justice was fair? Nobody murdered those people. Murder is the intentional killing of another human being with malice aforethought. Accused, even if you were to find the crew culpable, you can't say they murdered nobody. You could say gross negligence. You could go to manslaughter. You could go to a lot of things. There's no way you could say these people murdered.
Well, tell Nandalal now, because Nandalal supporting him on the charge. That is 00 not James Bond, license to lick Batty. Even he, because he used to be a liar, though he still is, can tell you that based on what we know, it is not murder. James Bond can say so. And then we have another attorney. Listen to him.
A very good afternoon to you, my brothers and sisters. This is Albert Baldio, the elected community leader and advocate of the largest diaspora outside of Guyana here in New York City, and also a former prosecutor, magistrate, and senior police legal advisor in Guyana. I want to shed some light on this issue that has grappled the entire world, the MV Barima tragedy. The 3 charges for murder that were instituted today are very, very shocking. Not because they don't fit the definition of murder, but because it's going to create a lot of prejudice, mayhem, chaos, and take away from the real substance or other facets of this inquiry that must be flushed out and that must be ventilated. For one thing, there's no felony murder rule implication there. The captain and these 2 members of the boat, the crew, they did not set out to kill anybody that day. There's difficulty in establishing an intent to murder. There's also difficulty to prove an intent to commit a felony. And the rule is that if in the pursuit or committal of a felony, a murder results, then that will be murder, largely, under the felony murder rule. But the problem we have here is that a mental intent is not there. That does not mean that they're not liable for some other offense that fits the definition of their recklessness or negligence. I believe that the charges are wrong. They are not going to stand up in court, and they're going to create unnecessary diversion, confusion, and prejudice, because these may be the very witnesses you need to get to the top, to get to what really happened and who were involved in this. Who were the people who were using the boat as their personal transportation and carrying cargo and large lumber that should have been carried on a barge. They're using and misusing and abusing and bribing their way with the ferries and causing people to be put in harm's way. So that is a particular instance that the Director of Public Prosecutions, who has the sole jurisdiction of criminal charges, must revise those charges and institute the right charges, and not focus the attention on 3 scapegoats, as has been complained to me here in New York, that they found the first 3 scapegoats, the captain and 2 other members of the crew, charge them for murder, and expect that this will then go away. It doesn't work that way. This is a process of investigation. This is a process of complete divulgence and going into research into what really happened today to prevent other mishaps. And toward that end, I've compiled a list for brevity to show that this commission of inquiry that we have, this is what the COI has got to focus on immediately. And that is, who authorized the number of passengers and quantity of cargo? Who prepared, checked, or disregarded the manifest? Whether stability calculations were completed? Whether the vessel was properly maintained and inspected, and whether known defects were reported and solved or repaired. Whether the vessel's certification was justified, and who did that. Whether replacement or repair recommendations were delayed. Whether officials, contractors, and supervisors exercised operational controls. Whether emergency and rescue procedures were adequate. And whether decisions by shore-based management contributed to the deaths. Meaning whether the other folks were involved in this. And of course, we have to find out the major inquiry, why weren't the docks completed for the Melissa, which we bought for $12 million, a lot of money, why wasn't that completed? Towards that end, These are what the Commission of Inquiry must focus on. This is what we need to get to the bottom of. This is what needs to be done. Not diversions and confusion and, sensationalism. The Commission of Inquiry is tasked to do a job. We should not be jumping ahead of it, but at the same time, we should not be failing to implement reforms, immediate reforms in Guyana's air, water, transport, road. These are reforms that must be complied with immediately. And I will talk about this in my next video.
He's a liar. You used to remember Mr. Baldio in Guyana? Police legal advice and all that. Now in the States. So they're saying, what they say, Mr. Hughes, 00 not, Mr. Baldio, and many others, Mr. Todd, many others are saying the same thing. Many others. And let me remind you all, this is the same DPP. And before I go there, let me read the statement issued by the DPP. Then let me read something first. They said that the decision to do so, that's to institute the charge, was based on careful consideration of the evidence presented. The men were charged with committing murder. The DPP office says it has evidence of murder. The DPP office is saying they have evidence of murder. In other words, they have evidence that these men intended to kill these persons or to cause grievous bodily harm. That's what the DPP is saying, right? It will be interesting to see the evidence which shows these men premeditated to kill the passengers of the MV Barima. Will there be a similar or any charges laid against the higher-ups in the Transport and Harbors Department? They obviously knew about the age and condition of the boat and probably knew about the overloading being a regular and normal thing. Will any head of any political appointee roll, or will this be sat out? And after a while, it will be back to business as usual. Remember the Maja Dormitory fire? No political heads rolled. And hear what the DPP said, the full statement. The DPP felt obliged to issue a statement. And the full statement of the DPP office, hear what it says. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is an independent office under Article 187 of the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and shall not be subject to any direction and control or any other person or authority. The DPP is also vested with the authority and power in any case in which the DPP considers desirable to institute and undertake criminal proceedings against any person before any court or any offense against the laws of Guyana, and to generally have control over any such proceedings instituted or undertaken. In the exercise of those powers, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions reviewed a file in relation to the MV Barima tragedy of the investigation done by the Guyana Police Force in relation thereto, and duly advised the institution of the charges of murder against the captain of the vessel, Kevin Price, chief mate, Ronald Dwayne Roberts, and good superintendent of Transport and Harbors Department, Delon Granderson. The decision to do so was based upon careful consideration of the evidence presented, the relevant principles of law involved, case law authorities from the United Kingdom Commonwealth jurisdiction and European Court of Human Rights, and public policy considerations. I have noted the impending establishment of an independent commission of inquiry by His Excellency the President, and wish to state that the business of this commission of inquiry will not affect the prosecution of the charge instituted. They can proceed simultaneously, as we have done in the case of the piracy charges in the Borbis matter in 2018 and the fraud charges in the 2020 regional and general elections. Given the unprecedented magnitude of this matter, coupled with the public interest factor, the prosecution will be conducted with due consideration of the work of the Commission of Inquiry. That is what the DPP said. She made what I consider a profound statement in the end, that they given due consideration to public interest. But again, me with the research thing, it says, I checked it, right? They say, yeah, you can look at public interest in determining, the DPP can look at public interest in determining whether to institute a charge, right? But they say the specific factors used to measure public interest has to be, you got to get evidence. Rules to prevent abuse. Evidence first. Public interest cannot override lack of evidence. If a case has weak proof, it must be dropped, no matter how famous or how important it is. Let me read about. Now the DPP invoked this issue about public interest. Basically, to say this has generated a lot of public interest. Indeed, it has. But here what the Code of Crown Prosecutors says. When you say evidence first, public interest cannot override a lack of evidence. If a case has weak proof, it must be dropped, no matter how famous or important it is. If the case is weak. And this is a weak case, let me understand it. Murder. And this is the same DPP, mind you. Let me show you all this. Let me remind you all. When that businessman across the river in Videnu shot and killed that policeman, which in a lot of opinion, including mine, was clear murder. He goaded the policeman. And then he shot him and killed him. The DPP caused him to be charged with manslaughter. Let me show you all the tape. Again. Here we go.
No, you want to. You want to move on the fucking station? I don't put the fucking enemy.
That wasn't murder. That businessman goaded the policeman. That man was shot there, policeman. They had an argument over some phone. Businessman there. He not had the gun, Panino. He go deliberately pick up a gun and shoot the man, one shot, bam, killed him. The DPP recommended, the same DPP, Shalimar Aliak, recommended a charge of manslaughter, and that man is on bail. $1 million bail, I think he was put on. And the DPP talk about independence and all this crap the DPP talking about. The DPP, all this nonsense they're talking about. Why wasn't that man charged with murder? In the face of clear evidence, and I said before, and I'm saying it again, if at the time when the charge was recommended, that video was not available to the DPP, it became very, it was widely circulated thereafter. And one would have recommended that the DPP would have reviewed the file, including that video that we just saw, and up the charge to murder. But no murder charge. The man catch a manslaughter charge, and this DPP charging these men for murder in respect of this MV Barima tragedy. That is the tragedy that we understand. But the DPP is suggesting that these men, when they set sail, they had an intention, or as Mr. Hughes pointed out, at some stage along the journey, they formed an intention to kill these people, because remember, they are jointly charged. So they formed at some place, they colluded to say, hey, we're going to sink this boat and kill all them rats. That is what they are saying. Either they said it, or it was implied that we're going to go. That is what you have. And they talk about one guy. One guy, yes, for them alone. One for them alone. And then in his usual manner, last night, the Attorney General, Anil Nandalal, SC, MP, went and NCN, and the usual thing, a scandal about it. But there's one part that I want to deal with today that he said. I'm going to come back to the others later. Because in dealing with the Commission of Inquiry, hold on, I pick up the wrong thing. Hear what Nandalal said last night, among other things. He said, the Commission, quote, as the President has outlined publicly, will have the broadest mandate to interrogate and investigate a number of important circumstances and matters. End of quote. Nandalal said, well, hear this part. According to Attorney General, the intended terms of reference are wide enough to allow a comprehensive probe into nearly every major issue connected to the tragedy. I'm going to come back at some other day. But hear this part. Let me read it back carefully. I'll tell you how I like to do statement analysis. I'm trained to do that. He says, according to the Attorney General, the intended terms of reference are wide enough to allow a comprehensive probe into nearly every major issue connected to this strategy. On air, what I find strange, you talk about the intended terms. So the terms are not finalized as yet. The intended terms of reference are wide enough. Not that the intended terms will be wide enough. Listen to the language, Listen to the language that they say the Attorney General, and if I'm wrong, those people like Patrick and them by who know good English, tell me they're wrong, and I'm going to admit. Because he's saying here, according to the Attorney General, the intended terms of reference are wide enough to allow for a comprehensive probe into nearly every major aspect or major issue connected with it. The intended terms are wide enough. Intended means that it hasn't finalized yet. You intend to put it together, but it is wide. That's a will be wide enough, or shall be wide enough. Just want to tell you, I like when they talk, I like when they talk, I like when they write. And they there was this issue too. Let me tell you, Alma. Let me go in this. Let me go into this part to tell you. Remember during this thing we were hearing that the captain and the crew members were imbibing, that they're drinking liquor, right? They were drinking and they're watching football, right? That is what was said. They were drinking and they were watching football. Members, survivors have said so. They're drinking and watching football, right? So hear this. Let me give you the football part. Sunday, when Saturday, when the boat set sail, you had the third place playoff between France and England. If my memory serves me correct, that playoff started around 4 o'clock the afternoon sometime then and lasted for what? About 2 hours? Y'all tell me if I'm wrong, The football, Saturday football, third place playoff between England and France started around, I think it was 4 o'clock. And within 2 hours, it was ended, the 10 goal. So if they were watching football, it means that by 7 o'clock, that part of it was over. So when the boat encountered difficulties 10-something the night, they couldn't have been watching football, at least not the live game, right? Couldn't be. And then they say the men were drinking. When Quarter Jill, right? Bishop Quarter Ejil, said about the men being tested, he said that they had found marijuana in the bloodstream, right? Marijuana in the bloodstream. Nobody ever said anything about liquor, Nobody said about them having alcohol in the system. And I said before, and I'm saying again, that it would have been easy to find if they had alcohol. Had that to do, well, maybe the hospital would not have had a breathalyzer machine to test, but draw the blood and do the blood analysis. That would have told you what quantity of alcohol, if any, they had in the system. But nowhere along the line that was done. We were told that was done. They told us that the captain and the first mate had marijuana in the system. And I see somebody else, a next lawyer on social media asked the same question. Even if they had marijuana in the blood, does that say, that doesn't tell you how long before the marijuana was consumed? Because if you consume marijuana over a period of time, it likely to have residue in your blood. So you could have had that marijuana, I guess, if you're a regular smoker, long before, and it's going to show up in your blood. And I have to tell this one from the new sycophant from the Essequibo Coast, Shawinola, yesterday, because I made a post and he came on to make a comment, and I decided I'm going to take you up on it, right? Because they talk about the war. I'll tell you that there's no offense known in law in Guyana. Talk about marijuana in your blood. None. You don't charge people for having marijuana in the blood. They are charged for possession or trafficking, depending on the quantity of marijuana they have. Possession or trafficking. If you got big quantity, it's trafficking. I can't remember the limit now. You got a little bit, it's possession of marijuana. Can't charge nobody for under the Narcotic and Psychotropic Substances Act because they get marijuana in their blood. I know that is used maybe for screening. You, a person applies for a job some way and all this type of thing. In the case of the Transport and Housing Department, they're still telling us there's get random and regular frequent checks. I hope all of those things are part of the Commission of Inquiry. So nowhere did we hear that these men were under the influence. So last night, Anil Nandalal, SC, MP, came out and hear what he had to say. Hear what Nandalal said last night. Listen to him.
The man who driving the boat, who was drunk, and the first mate who was also drunk and under the influence, and who were in charge of the boat, and who apparently were not at the wheel at the time, they must go free. Which part of planet Earth are these people living?
Who said this people must go free? Here, this jackass. I have a call you by your right name, and I didn't mean to insult the many jackasses around, right? Because I believe there's some jackass most sensible than this man. Imagine he is the Attorney General. He is the Attorney General. Can go on TV last night, the same night that these men are charged with murder, and make such a statement. And he had learning in the matter with Azuddin Mohammed and the same authority to proceed, which is the CCJ is scheduled to deliver the decision this afternoon at 2 o'clock. They upbraided him for commenting on matters before the court. They commented him. They upbraided him for commenting on matters before the court. So you have a matter before the court where men are charged with murder. And Nandalal ought to know that these men are presumed innocent until proven guilty. And he can assert publicly on television that the men were drunk. The captain was drunk. The first mate was drunk. Nandalal, that is what you have for Attorney General. That is what you have. A thing like that you have for Attorney General. Right? Prejudice, right away, you see prejudice. As I've said, he had learning. He had like brick, he got brick in the head, he had learning. Because the CCJ commented on that, is him going on television and commenting on matters that are before the court in case of the extradition case. Every Tuesday night, he been there talking us other thing. Every Tuesday night. And imagine it's something like that we get for Attorney General in Guyana, something like that we get for Attorney General. These men are charged before the court. And let me remind you, because apparently he ain't got to law school a day, he ain't got to school none of the days because, and the books that he's alleged to have stolen and serving no purpose. The matter is before the court. It is inappropriate for anyone, including the advisor, the legal advisor to the government, to come and make such a statement. It is highly inappropriate for him to go on TV. But you know, he's speaking to his sycophants, his audience. Because nobody has indicated, as far as I'm aware, that people must not be held accountable. But accountability stops with the captain, the mate, and the good superintendent. Accountability stops there. What happened to the subject ministers? What happened to the other people who might be involved in this whole process? You're suggesting to me that the captain is the person responsible for the repairs of this derelict vehicle? The captain is the one who would have made a decision for this boat to sail in that state? Because I see they done hustling, you know, they got someone who might have paid. There's a sheriff news come out this morning with a video. A man, a Indian man, claiming is the captain responsible because he got to sail the boat. That is the type of gaslighting and propaganda they're starting with. So Ejel, who is the minister? Indar, who is the minister? And who have ultimate responsibility? Not for this actual sailing of the boat, but to make sure that the boat is kept in a state of repair. They knew that. They knew that the boat was not, at least not up to scratch, because they bought a replacement. They bought a replacement, the MV Melissa. And when the boat arrived, then Ejil and them discover that the boat can't dock at the stelling there. Can't. So they start to modify the stelling for this boat to land. And then Lion Mark Phillips telling us that the boat travels something to marijuana and then to marijuana, and then smaller vessels from marijuana to Port Kaituma and all sort of crap they're telling you. All of them responsible. All of them. And let me tell you up front, I ain't got much faith in the Commission of Inquiry, because when the little research that I've done in terms of the Commission of Inquiry, I ain't got much faith. First of all, we have to wait. We have to wait and see what the terms of reference, the terms are, because Landelal done saying, listen to what Landelal is saying. According to him, the intended terms of reference are wide enough. They're intended, but they are wide enough. Not the intended terms will be wide enough. So the terms are what's going to curtail the CY people from doing any proper investigation. That is my view. That is my view. Well, I said Nandela up on TV commenting on this matter publicly. And then when we talk about accountability, let me show you all something here. As I tell you, I'm going to do my research, I'm doing my research. Listen to what accountability is. Listen to this.
There is a code of conduct that Guyana adopted in 2017. It's called the Nolan Principle of Public Life. Now, one of the main principles of that conduct, more importantly, is accountability. It is important to note that this entire principle is used by the Commonwealth nations, and whenever institutional failure happens, such as the example in the MV Barima tragedy, the Nolan Principle of Public Life is supposed to be used in regards to accountability. It simply states that those who uphold public office must answer not only for their own actions, but for the performance of the institutions they lead. So a good example is India's Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, who was just recently on July 25th forced to step down, not because he personally leaked exam papers, but because the ministry under his leadership failed. So for this reason, based on the Nolan Principle of Public Code of Conduct, which includes accountability, seems fit for the stepping down of Minister Juan Edgel in his current position as Minister of Public Works. The main point here is institutional failure, which resulted in the death of over 70 people in the MV Barima tragedy. I'm Jennifer Jabbar. Thanks for listening.
Another video, another tape for us to understand accountability. Edgel and Indar must be held accountable. So that scapegoating the captain and the first mate and the good superintendent. Again, I say, what evidence can they provide for a murder charge? What evidence? But this DPP that we have, not concerned with evidence to convict. This is parade them before the court. And you know the type of people can't help but observing the type of people that we have being paraded there on this murder charge, right? They parade them on this murder charge, and that is it. And let me say this. I have a lot of things to say. But let me point out this right away. I want to know if the people at Transport and Harbors Department have a union. Because I was led to believe that there is supposed to be a union. They pay dues, and this union is supposed to represent the interests of the members. I don't know up to what level at the Transport and Harbors Department. What the union people have to say about this? What do you have to tell your members about this? Because this has implication for the others, the other sailors and the other captain. Because if you're going to find these people criminally liable for murder, you have got to watch out. And I would think that you would want to make sure that if anything is wrong with your boat that you're put to command or to work on, you're going to make nice at the right place, right? They say, inter beniba, make Kwashiba take notice. You not see thing at daylight, at daytime, and wait till night to get candle, what they say, to get fire stick for look for them. It is there before you that the DPP and these people will charge you, notwithstanding all the other issues. So it is for you to determine whether you want to go along and get charged. This is for you to determine whether you want to go along or get charged. But I am saying that the union, because you understand the union gets some president who lives abroad. I know that does work. They're saying the Transport and Arbors Workers Union. That is the information I receive. As a president or the head of the union, however the designation is, he lives in North America. That is what my sources told me. Because I would have expected by now the union would have mobilized to see make representation for these other members who or other persons, because I suspect some of them, even if all of them might not be represented by the union, depending up to what level. Sailors have died. And at least you should have a responsibility to represent the interests of those persons who have died. The next thing I want to say, I saw this morning a video on social media where residents of Denhamstel, I think the load master, Mr. Grandison, lives in Denhamstel. They came out and they were protesting. Kudos to you protesting. But you can't stop at Denhamstel. You got to give them the Gadrach treatment, man. You have to give Ejil and Indar the Gadrach treatment. You know what is the Gadrach treatment? Nothing illegal. In Ronald Gadrach's case, when he was there accused of supervising this death squad that was killing people, they were calling for him to resign. And Bara Jagdeo was the president, refused to let go of him. And the people decided they're going to protest. I think one of the leaders was the late Debbie Baker. They used to go where he lived. The protesters used to turn up early morning, so as Boardwalk wake in front of Gadget's house and protest. Come on, protesting on the road at Denhamstel is good, but you got to be more strategic. Because they ain't gonna move, you know, despite the fact they talk about, we saw the video there about responsibility and that, they ain't know nothing but responsibility. And then when, coming back to when the DPP talk about these cases and SWAT cases, I have not found, maybe the DPP can make that available to the public for education. I have not found a single case where people who are responsible for disasters, right? Whether it's maritime, whether it's train, whether it's fire, whether it's disco thing, I have not found a single case where the people are charged with murder. I have not found any. But I've seen many of them are charged with homicide, negligible homicide. That is what is there. I see that. I see in many cases the people responsible are made to resign. Some of them voluntary because they got decency. But you have a bishop with no decency, none at all. So he can continue to work. He can continue to hold office. And then the prime minister can tell you, well, the resignation of the Bishop Ejil, Bishop Bella Bishop Quarter Jill, the decision for the president to make. That is what Mark Phillips said. What happened? He and get well. So this is rhetorical. He, of his own free will and volition, should decide if he is indeed this Christian man that he purports to be. Should decide that in the best interest of, well, let me don't put it this way. He should decide that the good Lord would want him to step aside while the investigation into the Lord's flock is going on. Step aside. And I'm saying he should not only step aside, he should go home. This is a man who, y'all forget, some years ago, blasphemously stated at a PPP meeting that if Jesus were to come down, he can vote for PPP. Ejil, same quarter, Ejil, quarter Ejil said so. At Monrepo, I think it was. That if Jesus were to come down, he can vote for PPP. And you get people going to sit down in church, say they listen to this hypocrite, this heretic. They listen to you. Right? They listen to you. But they say election has consequences. Right? Election has consequences. Let me go back to the other part of this thing, the salvaging of this vessel. I maintain that if you are going to, you have already charged people with murder, and you have indicated, based on the charge, that part of your evidence is that the vessel was overloaded. I believe, therefore, it is imperative that you bring up the vessel so they can see the load in the cargo hold of the vessel. Because remember, people say, upon them seats and so on, you had goods and so on, you know. People say now, engine for the government and all sort of thing, been there, roller, vehicles, all them things been. You want evidence, you got to bring that up. But they're claiming that this thing is in such a precarious position, it can't be brought up. And I remember some years ago, a Russian submarine, Kurtz I think was the name. They had an exercise. Some torpedo exploded within the submarine and it sank. 100 and something soldiers eventually died, right? Sank in the Bering Sea, I think it was. The Russian government, that of course, because there was indication that some men had not died immediately, some had survived, they moved themselves into some compartment, but eventually the air sucked out, and I think there was some fire which consumed some of the oxygen, and the men eventually died. All of them died. They brought a rescue vessel, I think from the Netherlands or somewhere there. Long after, they brought a rescue vessel, and that sunken submarine was raised, and all the bodies were recovered and accounted for. I know y'all want to tell me the sea, maybe the water cold and might have preserved the bodies and all that. But after months, those bodies were recovered. And as one of the victims' sister said, even if my body bone, and you bring it up, I'm going to satisfy and get closure. But instead of that, what they're trying to do, I understand they're trying to go around. Mark Phillips alluded to that yesterday, to get the family members of those who have not been accounted for, those who have not been recovered, to say, well, it's better you left the body there and we can erect some monument some way in honor of them. Nonsense. You talk about a criminal case already before the court. It is imperative that that vessel be raised to see what evidence, because people talk about broken down engine. People talk about the vessel being overloaded and all this type of thing. Bring it up. You're going to see the state of the hull. All of that should be a key part of the inquiry, the COI. The state of the vessel. Bring it up so that it can be properly examined. And the expert will know, well, this was a old rotten vessel that should not have been on the water top in the first instance. But they don't want it to come up. And the reason why they don't want it to come up, because they don't want that evidence to be revealed. It is clear. They don't want the evidence to be revealed. And that is even more reason why I'm saying they know that they can't get no conviction for murder in this case. None. Let me be clear about this. Let me be clear about this. I don't know what evidence the DPP is saying that they have. I don't know what evidence they say they have. But no way a fair jury, if it get to that stage, will convict these people with murder. With murder. I know what they're charging for murder, hoping to get a conviction for manslaughter. Because there are cases where you can institute a charge for murder, and then based on the evidence in the court at the trial time, the judge can instruct the jury to consider manslaughter. Or there might be some plea bargaining that we can drop the murder charge, and the people might decide to agree to take a manslaughter charge. All those are possibilities, but murder, where these men are not going to be locked away for years because a murder charge in Ghana don't come to the conclusion in the High Court till 4 or 5 years, you know. So these men who were remanded yesterday can expect to be there for a long time. But let me say this, and this is one for the lawyers. This is one for the lawyers. Can you not move to the High Court? I know the wicked set, but for the records, can you not move to the High Court to have the court review the decision of the DPP to charge these men with murder? Remember the precedent with the Henry Green case? Henry Green, Commissioner of Police, was alleged to have raped a young lady. And the police did an investigation with the assistance of outside police. And they had recommended that Green be charged with rape. Green moved to the High Court before the charge was instituted and got Ian Chan to call on the DPP to explain our decision to institute a rape charge against Henry Green. And then the DPP, then the Chan ruled that there wasn't enough evidence, because Chan said it's not whether you have enough evidence to charge, it's whether you have enough evidence to convict. That ruling somewhere, all them things I get, Ian Chan. So I'm saying to the lawyers, all of them, Dexter, Darren, and all those people who are representing the interests of men, maybe you said on the 3rd is disclosure time, but maybe even before then, or when you will know, you are the trained people, whether you can't now move to the High Court to seek to get the court to review, you have a judicial review of the decision of the DPP to institute a murder charge against these men. That will be good. Because as I've said, in the Henry Green case, well, the difference is that Henry Green moved before he was charged. And DPP and the Chief Justice, I'm not sure if he was Chief Justice, but Ian Chan said he should not be charged. Now that these people have already been charged, I think the same principle can apply. You can move to have a review of the evidence to charge, because the precedent is there. I hope you all do the research, because in Henry Green's case, Chan said, and I'm paraphrasing here, it is not sufficient to say that you have enough evidence for him to be charged with rape. It's to whether the evidence can lead to a conviction. And Chan opined that the evidence against Green could not lead to a conviction. And therefore, he ordered that the matter be, he should not be charged. So this is one for the liars, man. This is one for the liars. That is one. And then in terms of the vessel that is there, I know jumping around. In terms of the vessel, hear what the leader of the opposition had to say yesterday afternoon. And again, I urge you, forget about the messenger, listen to the message. So hear what the leader of the opposition had to say.
The government's decision to leave the MV Barima at the bottom of the Atlantic is premature and wicked. It is a decision that should not have been made, while scores of families are still waiting on their loved ones who are still missing. To abandon the MV Barima now is an act of cruelty toward those families. Families have reached out to me saying they want the bodies of their loved ones, even if all that remain are bones.
All I'm kindly asking the president is to get off the boat, because I really need my brother. If it's a bone, I just need it. I don't want a memorial, nothing.
It will bring closure. The government did not exhaust every possible option. They have not sought out international help with the expertise and equipment to recover that vessel. Yet, they are already talking about turning it into a memorial. There is a reason this administration does not want the MV Barima brought to the surface. What are they hiding? The vessel was overloaded and should not be carrying the volume of cargo it was carrying. One of the engines was down, and an overloaded vessel needs both engines, especially to navigate rough waters. We have heard from the captain who they arrested and charged for murder.
Everybody knows the whole vessel is going to be the one is 87 years old, that vessel. The vessel have a lot of history, the vessel I'm not walking. The vessel radar don't have a radar. The vessel don't have a search and rescue transponder. The vessel don't even have a keyboard. Oh God, boy, look at those life draft expires in 2022 and maritime inspection and the right after festival. Look, things like that. God, look at like last them, their expires since 2022.
That the vessel had no functioning emergency position indicating radio beacon, EPIRB, no search and rescue transponder, an inoperable anchor, no operational radar, and life rafts expired since 2022. The Barima had been transporting construction materials and other cargo for big businessmen and those with major projects in Region 1. Cargo that should otherwise be transported by barge. We may never know the truth because they do not want to recover the vessel and let the evidence speak. Additionally, Minister Ejil's explanation does not add up. He referred to the vessel's gross tonnage, but gross tonnage is not the amount of weight a vessel can safely carry. It is a measure of a vessel's internal volume, used for regulatory purposes. The relevant figure is the vessel's dead weight, which is the maximum combined weight of passengers, cargo, fuel, water, and other loads that can safely be carried. The MV Barima's dead weight was 198 tons. Yet, Minister Ejil stated there were 268 tons on board.
The boat was not overloaded by passengers or by cargo. There was no engine problem or any mechanical problem. Even the survivors who made videos from the hospital, they're telling you what happened. And it had nothing to do with overload and boat taken in water. It had to do with the tide. Please be advised that the MV Barima is licensed to carry 284 tons of cargo. The cargo manifest shows that we had 268 tons, way below the cargo load. Secondly, the MV Barima is licensed to carry 397 passengers, and we only had 116 passengers on board. The misinformation of overloading as the cause of this incident must be dealt with for what it is. Misinformation and something to create panic and public mischief, and we debunk that in the very strongest terms.
Therefore, based on Ejil's explanation, the vessel was carrying about 70 tons more than its dead weight capacity. It is Ejil who should have been arrested and remanded to prison. Let me make my position clear. I, Azruddin Mohammed, leader of the opposition, am prepared to undertake this salvage operation. I have already engaged international partners who have assured me they have the equipment, expertise, and capability to bring the MV Barima to the surface. Give me the permission to float this vessel. I will recover the vessel so that the COI can be properly conducted. I will do everything possible to recover the remains of those still trapped, provide families with the closure they deserve, and ensure that every piece of evidence is preserved. If the government truly has nothing to hide, then there should be no objection to bringing up the MV Barima.
Yeah, you already did for yourself. Yeah. And I raised the issue earlier about the union. I'm advised that it is the Transport and Harbors Amalgamated Workers Union, representing the workers of Transport and Harbors Department. I'm further advised that the president is Mr. Godfrey White, who presently lives in the USA. That is what I'm being told. The president of the union that is supposed to be representing the interests of the employees of the Transport and Harbors Department, the man there in Region 11. He lives in Region 11. And you have workers there paying monthly union dues. You see how this thing, how the corruption is work? And when you listen to Ejil, I have to play this song when you listen to Ejil.
To see who they will crown as lion champion. Liars from all parts of the West Indies, big shot liars from all them foreign countries. From a feel about 1,000 or so entry in 2 days, he boiled down and leave just 3. I had me eye on Liar the lion, because I know he does come with some good ones. But they had a younger fella named Debo, come from some village here in Tobago. He say his father is Tobago's best fisherman. Catch a fisherman wide 80 feet in span. He had to tighten the boat and swim back to land to get his brother Eric to give him a hand. You hear lie? That is lie. Lie? You hear lie? Teacher Pussy say if you tell a lie, you're going to hell as soon as you die.
Well, Gillen going to hell as soon as he died. He on the way there already. Being a man who's supposed to know better, he's supposed to be a man of the cloth. Right? That is what you have. They don't want the vessel to come up because bringing up the vessel is going to reveal a lot of stuff, reveal the lies. And let me tell you all this because I understand that famous magician, they borrowed the famous magician from the police. I'm speaking about the magician Mandrake, where they're now manufacturing us at the records because at one of the press conferences, Leroy Smith asked them for some documentation to show I think the registration of the MV Barima, and they promised to give it on Monday. That was on Friday last. Stephen Thomas promised to get it on Monday. I understand they haven't gotten it as yet because Mandrake has not completed his assignment to manufacture stuff. It's a lot of cooking up and thing passing there. They're cooking the books and all them everything. I understand that is what is going on at high levels in the Transport and Work Arbors Department. They're cooking the books. They're cooking the books. So that all this thing when they talk about this tonnage and that tonnage, they're cooking the book so that the book can reflect that. But let me say this. I don't want to go into the Commission of Inquiry in any great detail today, right? But the persons are named. And Nandalal made a statement last night in respect to this Commission of Inquiry. He said they deliberately named foreigners because they don't want to be accused of bias. I'm going to address that. I am going to address that when we come again because they have named the commissioners or the persons to be the Commission of Inquiry. We ain't here yet who going to be the legal officer to the commission, who is going to be the secretary, and I can bet you, my last dollar, that they're going to be one of them FFFs. Look to see who will be the secretary of the commission, who will be the legal officer to the commission. Remember the last commission we had, the Major Commission, they put Keoma Griffith, who is now rewarded with the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Labor's job. He's now the Ministry of Labor, Keoma Griffith, attorney at law from the office on South Road. So watch to see what is going to happen with the naming of the other people. Folks, let me put back this. Ghana is not a real place, right? Ghana is not a real place, and as I've said, I will continue to examine and highlight these things. I don't have enough time this afternoon to go into the modalities relating to the Commission of Inquiry. I plan to do so at the earliest opportunity, right? I'm going to do so at because there's a lot to discuss. The common table Commission of Inquiry, and then I'll tell you about the terms, the proposed terms or the intended terms, gonna be all sort of crap they're talking, all sort of things, because they're gonna be annexed the Commission of Inquiry. My crystal ball tells me it's gonna be a next whitewash. They're gonna come together to absolve Nandalal, to absolve Indar, to absolve the Transport and Harbors Department from all blame. And the three people who have been identified, the three scapegoats, they can somehow get all the blame. Major Commission of Inquiry again, all the blame those people are going to get. Because I asked the question, how was the president able to identify these people so quickly? The boat sank Saturday night. And it's when, I think Sunday or sometime, then the president done find 5